All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer. I am incredibly excited to be your guide today as we set the stage for what is honestly one of history's most chilling, baffling, and enduring cold cases. We're heading back to the winter of 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, to unravel a mystery that has completely obsessed investigators, scientists, and sleuths for over 60 years now.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to just picture this paradox for a second. You've got 9 experienced hikers. They are entirely safe inside their tent, and then they suddenly decide to flee into the pitch-black night, braving negative 40 degrees Celsius weather. And they do it without their shoes on. They're totally inadequately dressed for a lethal winter storm. Why on earth would they do that? Well, to figure out this giant puzzle, we have to piece together the evidence they left behind.
Part 1. The Ill-Fated Expedition. To really understand the end of this mystery, we first have to look at the beginning and the actual people involved.
I want to be super clear right off the bat. This was absolutely not a group of amateurs out for a weekend stroll. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, these were highly capable university students and deeply seasoned hikers. Semyon Zolotaryov, who was the oldest at 38, was actually studying for his master's certificate in mountain hiking. Every single person in this group already held Grade 2 hiking certifications. They were taking on this brutal February track specifically to earn their Grade 3, which was literally the highest certification available in the Soviet Union at the time, so they knew exactly what they were doing.
So let's trace their path. The expedition starts off completely fine in late January. Then, around January 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, actually has to turn back because of joint pain and illness. And wow, talk about a stroke of luck. That essentially saved his life. By February 1st, the remaining 9 hit some really nasty weather and snowstorms. They end up losing their direction and visibility, so they deviate west and decide to pitch their tent on the exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl mountain instead of heading downhill into the safety of the tree line.
Which brings us to part 2, a bizarre discovery.
When the group didn't send a promised telegram by mid-February, search parties were immediately dispatched. Take a look at this quote from Mikhail Sharavin, a student searcher who first found the campsite on February 26th. The tent was half torn down, covered in snow, and the wildest part? All of their survival gear, including their shoes, was just sitting right there inside. But investigators quickly noticed something even more terrifying. The tent hadn't been ripped by the wind. It had been physically cut open from the inside. They were desperate to get out.
But then, you look at the ground. There were 9 distinct sets of footprints leading away from the tent. And they were made by people in only their socks, maybe a single shoe, or completely barefoot. The tracks led about a mile downhill toward a nearby forest. Can you even imagine being barefoot in the snow in those temperatures? But here's the detail that absolutely baffles everyone. The footprints didn't show people sprinting in sheer panic. They were entirely consistent with a group walking at a normal, deliberate pace away from their shelter.
Section 3. Autopsies and Anomalies. Finding the campsite was just the start. Following those footprints led to some incredibly grim medical findings that only deepened the mystery.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sharp, terrifying contrast between the two groups of victims. The first 5 bodies, discovered between February and March, died of hypothermia. They were found near a makeshift fire at the tree line, basically trying to desperately claw their way back up to the tent. But the second group, they were found much later in May, and they didn't just freeze to death. They suffered massive, fatal physical trauma and this completely inexplicable soft tissue damage.
4. That is how many meters of snow they had to dig through to find those final bodies in a ravine. To put that into perspective, that's over 13 feet of snow. The searchers also found signs of a truly desperate bid for survival. These 4 hikers were wearing clothes that were literally ripped and stolen from the bodies of their dead friends who had perished first near the trees.
And the autopsies for this second group just completely defied logic. I mean, we're talking skull and chest fractures inflicted with the sheer force of a severe car crash. Yet, bizarrely, they completely lacked any external wounds or bruising. It was like they were crushed by immense pressure. Some were missing their eyes, tongues, and facial tissue. And as if the whole shebang wasn't weird enough, trace levels of radiation were found on a piece of their clothing. It was so weird that the 1959 medical examiner actually ended up ruling that a, quote, compelling natural force was what caused the deaths.
Section 4. Conspiracy and Fringe Theories. The official inquest was quickly shut down in May 1959, and the records were sealed. This created a massive information vacuum that just bred decades of wild speculation. But before we get into the wild theories, we do need to address one of the most famous visual anomalies of this case: why some of the victims were found stripped down to their underwear in the freezing cold. This is actually a documented medical phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. Basically, severe hypothermia completely scrambles the brain, making victims feel a burning sensation of warmth, so they just strip off their clothes right before they die. It rationally explains one huge piece of the puzzle.
But what about the rest of the puzzle, right? Naturally, people started filling in the blanks with all sorts of competing theories. Was it an attack by the local Mansi tribe? Well, investigators ruled that out pretty fast because there were zero other footprints or signs of a struggle. Could it have been wind-generated infrasound causing a severe panic attack? Or maybe violent, sudden catabolic winds? And of course, you've got the Soviet military theories, totally fueled by reports of glowing orange orbs in the sky and the radiation. Proponents of the military theory argue a parachute mine explosion caused those internal injuries, while critics will rightly point out that the weird orange skin coloring was simply a natural mummification process from being exposed to the elements for months.
Let's move to Section 5, the Avalanche Consensus, and see how this all builds to a logical conclusion. In 2019, the Russian government actually reopened the case to focus purely on natural explanations.
So grounding this entirely in physics, we have to talk about the slab avalanche. Unlike a massive, roaring wall of loose powder that you see in movies, a slab avalanche is a cohesive, super dense block of snow that breaks off and slides silently. In 2021, Swiss scientists actually ran computer models proving that this exact, localized phenomenon could easily happen on the specific slope of Kholat Syakhl, and a slab that size carries more than enough blunt force weight to completely crush ribs and skulls without leaving a single scratch on the skin.
Let's just walk through exactly what scientists think happened that night, step by step. Step 1. The hikers dig their tent into the slope, inadvertently weakening the snow base. Step 2. Hurricane-force winds and massive snowfall batter the camp, dropping temps to -40. Step 3. A heavy snow slab breaks and slides down, silently crushing the tent and causing those brutal internal injuries to some of the members. Step 4. Terrified in the pitch black, hearing the cracking snow and reasonably fearing a larger avalanche is coming right behind it, the surviving hikers slice their way out and execute an immediate evacuation.
So the crucial point to take away from all this is captured perfectly right here. The skiers' expertise doomed them. Because they were highly trained, they didn't just panic and frantically dig around in an active avalanche zone. They executed a textbook evacuation. They walked calmly to the tree line to wait it out, but doing exactly the right thing tragically left them entirely exposed to hypothermia and sent the badly injured members stumbling into a pitch-black ravine only to be buried under the snow, where running water and natural scavenging later caused all that weird soft tissue damage.
It's just a profoundly tragic chain of events. And it kind of leaves us with this final thought for today. Is the brutal, completely indifferent reality of nature actually more terrifying than the wild conspiracies we invent to try and make sense of it? These 9 experts literally did everything right in the face of an impossible situation, yet the mountains still claimed them. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.